In the year 2020, when the world was still reeling from the effects of COVID-19, everything changed. People were forced to stay inside, and while many were stuck in their homes, I saw this as an opportunity to do what I loved. Explore the outdoors. I was an avid hiker and camper, so I used the lockdown as an excuse to escape into nature. One of my favorite spots was a quiet, serene creek deep in the heart of a national park in Colorado. Now, before I get too deep into this, I have to share that things weren't easy for me back then. A mistake I made at my job the previous year led to a lot of problems. I lost my job, had to leave my apartment, change my phone number, and on top of that, a lot of people turned their backs on me. My reputation took a big hit, and some of those people lost money because of my actions. Naturally, I became a target for their anger and frustration. For months, I received threatening messages from unknown numbers. Sometimes the messages came in one after another, and other times they'd stop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, someone who wanted revenge. At the time, I wasn't working. I was taking time to process everything. And to get some clarity, I decided to visit various national parks. The trip to Colorado was one of those escapes. It was a 3-hour drive to the Rocky Mountains, where I found a quiet trail leading to the creek. There were no other hikers around, probably because of the strict lockdown. The snow-covered ground crunched beneath my boots as I made my way through the quiet woods. The peacefulness of the place was just what I needed. When I finally reached the creek, the water was still flowing, sparkling in the light of the fading day. It was perfect. I set up camp by the creek, built a fire, and cooked a simple meal. I felt at peace for the first time in a long while. After dinner, I read a few chapters of my book by the warmth of the fire, but as the night grew darker, something changed. I felt the familiar buzz of my phone vibrating in my pocket. To be honest, I didn't expect much. My friends and family were the only ones who ever texted me. But when I checked my phone, there were several messages from an unknown number. My heart raced when I saw the area code was from a place I didn't recognize. The first message said, "How's the camping going, buddy?" Followed by another message, "It's beautiful out here." Then another, "I see why you came here." My gut twisted. Something felt wrong. I thought for a moment it could be a joke, maybe a friend messing with me. But these messages felt too personal, too specific. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere with no one else around. I didn't know what to make of it. I tried to push my anxiety aside, but it wasn't easy. The messages kept coming, and my paranoia grew. I grabbed my phone, texting back, "Who is this?" But the response that came back was just as eerie. "Doesn't matter anymore." My mind raced. How did they know I was camping here? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. The darkness outside seemed deeper now, the silence of the woods pressing in. Then I heard something, a crunching noise in the snow, getting closer. I froze, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. My heart pounded in my chest. A bright light flashed through the fabric of the tent, like someone was taking a picture of me. Panic surged through me. I reached for my small pistol, trying to steady my shaking hands. My mind screamed at me to stay calm, but I couldn't. I waited, listening, as the footsteps retreated into the night. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message, a photo. It was a picture of my tent. The message simply said, "Have a good night's sleep." The fear I felt was suffocating. But then something shifted. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a sudden clarity. Without thinking, I unzipped the tent, grabbed my gun, and fired 2 shots into the air. The sound of running footsteps quickly faded, and I knew I had scared whoever it was away. I didn't sleep much after that. My heart was racing, my mind was buzzing with questions, but I knew I was safe, for now. In the morning, when the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I felt a huge sense of relief. Whoever had been texting me, stalking me, had backed off. I hadn't heard from them since. That night changed me. It taught me that sometimes you have to protect yourself. Physically and mentally, I never expected to be in a situation like that, but I'm thankful that I was prepared. And to this day, I've never been bothered again. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, or how quickly everything could have gone differently. Looking back, I realize how vulnerable I was, and how one decision, having that gun, may have saved me from something much worse. When I was a kid, my family had a special tradition. Every October, we'd pack up and head to northern Michigan for a weekend getaway. My Uncle Jim had a large 4-acre property up there, and the house on it could comfortably fit all of us. It had 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. Perfect for a big family. My cousins and siblings shared rooms, and the adults took the others. It was always a cozy time, full of laughter and games. Uncle Jim was a big hunter and fisherman, and he'd often go on hunting trips all over the country. My dad, despite being an animal lover, had gone with him a few times. But most of all, Uncle Jim loved the property for the surrounding forest. He'd marked the trees with red paint to define the boundaries of his land. And beyond that, it was just endless woods, county-owned and largely untouched. One afternoon, as our dads sat around talking about their hunting trips, my brother Adam, my cousins Jake and Joe, and I came up with an idea. We wanted to camp in the woods that night. Our dads, already a bit tipsy, were quick to agree. Our moms, of course, weren't thrilled with the idea, but they didn't outright say no. So, after dinner, our dads led us into the woods with a tent. The girls, my cousins and sister, stayed behind. It was just us boys, eager for an adventure. We were all around the same age, 13, 10, and 9 years old. We ventured deep into the forest, past the boundary lines, to a little clearing my uncle called a deer bed. It was covered in soft moss, and he'd told us he'd camped there before. With the alcohol still in their systems, my dad and Uncle Jim gave us a half-drunken lesson on how to set up a tent. They made us help, but honestly, it was kind of fun. We set up the big tent, big enough for the 4 of us before heading back to the house, to kill time until it was dark enough to go back. That evening, after dinner, our moms once again voiced their concerns, but our dads reassured them. They said we'd be fine, even joking that they'd hear our screams if anything went wrong. As the night fell, we headed back to the tent with flashlights and blankets to stay warm. Once inside, we started playing Uno, just trying to keep things light. The tent was small, and the flashlight's glow made everything feel cozier. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A scream. A loud woman's scream, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. We froze, staring at each other, unsure of what to think. I remembered once hearing that foxes can scream like women, so I reassured the group, telling them it was probably just that. Joe, the youngest, was still scared. But we went back to our game. But then it happened again. Louder and closer this time. It didn't sound like a fox anymore. It was definitely more human. We all went silent, our hearts racing. Joe looked like he was about to cry. I told everyone to turn off their flashlights, and we huddled in the darkness. We couldn't bring ourselves to run. After all, the woods felt safer than being chased by whatever was out there. We sat in silence, straining to hear. Then the footsteps came, fast, crunching through the leaves, coming closer to the tent. Then it stopped. And that's when the scream hit again, right outside the tent, so close it felt like it was in the same space as us. The tent shook violently, and that's when we all lost it. We screamed, panicked, and I quickly unzipped the door. We bolted, flashlights waving, running as fast as we could, back toward the house. The entire property was a blur as we sprinted through the woods. Every noise, every movement in the dark made our blood run cold. When we finally made it to the house, we were all breathless and terrified. Our parents were outside, clearly startled by our screams. We explained what had happened, about the screams, the shaking tent, but they didn't know what to make of it. Then I realized something that made my stomach drop. My cousins Jamie and Christina and my sister, none of them were outside. I immediately accused our dads of sending the girls to prank us, but they quickly showed us the girls were already in bed. That's when we knew. Whoever or whatever had been out there wasn't part of our family. Our dads went into the woods, rifles in hand, to search for any sign of what might have been there. They didn't find anything. The next morning, we packed up the tent and everything else. No one wanted to be out there after dark again. We didn't even play outside much after that. What happened that night still haunts me. I have no answers, no real explanation for the terrifying sounds and the feeling of being watched. Whoever or whatever was out there that night was something I'll never forget. Even now, I wonder what was real and what was just the mind playing tricks. The whole experience left me questioning everything. Before we continue with the next video, be sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated with all our upcoming content. Don't forget to like and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. This happened 2 years ago, and to this day, I still get chills just thinking about it. I know how unbelievable this sounds, and if I were in your shoes, I probably wouldn't believe it either. But I swear on everything, it's the truth. My dad and I had planned a camping trip to a secluded spot deep in the country. We loved these trips. Just the two of us, getting away from everything. The place we chose this time was peaceful, surrounded by hiking trails, zip lines, and a bit of touristy charm, but with a deep Native American history. The first night was perfect. There were families scattered around, campfires glowing, kids laughing. The kind of camping atmosphere you hope for. We roasted hot dogs, made s'mores, cracked open some beers, and chatted with other campers. It was a great start. But the second night, that's when things started to take a turn. The staff told us we were the only ones in the park that night. No other campers had booked a site. At first, we thought it was awesome. A whole campground to ourselves. How peaceful. We spent the day hiking, fishing, and taking it slow. At one point, we even listened to a scary podcast by the river, just leaning into the spooky vibes. By the time the sun started to set, we were both a little buzzed from the beers, exhausted in the best way from being outside all day. We decided to head to the park's information center to grab some snacks and charge our phones before it got too dark. As we walked back to our campsite, something felt off. The woods felt different, the air heavier, like it had a strange weight to it. The sky had this odd tint, like twilight was lingering too long. My dad turned to me and said, "Doesn't this feel weird? Like we're in some kind of dream?" And he was right. It really did. The forest stretched on endlessly, and I felt a tightness in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We didn't say much after that. We just kept walking, both glancing over our shoulders, half expecting to see something hiding just out of sight. When we got back to camp, we didn't talk about it. We just stayed close to the fire, trying to keep things normal. We roasted marshmallows, played some music, and smoked a little weed to calm our nerves, though neither of us felt relaxed. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, we could barely see anything except the flickering firelight. Then it happened. Around 9 p.m., we heard a loud bang, a tree falling or something heavy crashing through the woods, not far from the river, maybe 100 yards away. We grabbed our flashlights, shining them into the woods, but there was nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, We joked. Maybe it was Bigfoot. But deep down, neither of us believed it. Minutes passed, and then it happened again. A bang. Louder this time, farther off, but still heavy and unsettling. We pointed our flashlights toward the noise, but the forest swallowed the light, and all we could see were the trees around us. Then, a third bang, this time much closer, about 20 yards away. The fear hit like a punch to the stomach. It was moving toward us, circling us. Before we could process what was happening, a fourth bang sounded. This one so close. It felt like it was right on top of us. The adrenaline kicked in. Whatever high I had from the weed was long gone, replaced by pure terror. My dad turned to me, eyes wide, his face pale with fear. Without saying a word, we scrambled for the tent, throwing the last of the firewood onto the flames, hoping the fire would somehow keep whatever it was away. We dove into the tent, leaving everything behind, and I collapsed onto the ground, flat on my back. My dad moved a little slower, and just as he was about to enter the tent, the loudest bang of all echoed through the air, so close it felt like the ground itself shook. My dad froze, staring out into the dark. I whispered his name, trying to snap him out of it. He turned to me, eyes wide in shock, and muttered, "It's standing there." "What's standing there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he whispered back. His voice was shaking. It's like a wall of darkness. I huddled under my sleeping bag, trying not to make a sound. My dad sat by the zipper, clutching a small knife, the only weapon we had, though it felt utterly useless. Then we heard it. A low, vibrating hum that wasn't just sound. It felt like it was vibrating in the air, pressing against our chests. I'd never felt anything like it. My dad whispered, "You hear that?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, too scared to say anything. We felt hunted, like something was waiting for us to slip up, and then it came. This horrible, guttural, alien-like noise. It wasn't animal, and it definitely wasn't human. I can't even describe it. It was like something straight out of a horror movie. We both froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. I had this small mesh window by my head, but I couldn't bring myself to look out of it, too terrified to see what was there. My dad just sat there, clutching the knife, while I lay as still as possible. Then, the strangest thing happened. In the middle of all the chaos, we both just blacked out. Neither of us remembers trying to fall asleep. When we woke up, we were lying in the middle of the tent, wide awake but completely disoriented. I checked my phone. It was dead. I asked my dad if his phone was working. It was dead too. Both phones, fully charged the night before, now completely drained. We stepped outside to pee, still shaken, trying to shake off the unease. But when we did, everything felt wrong. The air was cold and still. The food we'd left on the table was untouched, and the fire that had been roaring when we left was now just a pile of ashes. It was like nothing had happened, like the night had erased itself. We spent the rest of the night in silence, barely speaking, just trying to sleep. When we packed up the next morning, we didn't say a word until we were in the car. That's when we finally started talking and realized we'd both felt the same thing. That feeling of being watched, hunted, like something was waiting for us to make a mistake. We told my mom when we got home, but she just thought we were crazy. Maybe we had been drugged or inhaled something weird, but it wasn't that. Whatever happened that night, it was real. My dad came closest to seeing it, but neither of us will ever forget that feeling. We haven't been back to that campsite since. In fact, we haven't gone camping at all since then. I don't think we ever will.